When my sister saw the bruise on my face, she said nothing. My husband, on the other hand, gave a relaxed smirk. But he didn't expect what came next, because 30 minutes later, my father walked into our apartment. I had always believed that a happy family life was guaranteed to me, as if by default. A birthright. Born from being raised in a loving home, where my parents respected one another, and my sister and I never heard a single quarrel behind closed doors. I thought I'd simply copy that model in my own marriage. Just transfer it, like a pattern. How terribly wrong I was. Looking at myself in the bathroom mirror, struggling to recognize my swollen left eye and the bruise blooming black across my cheekbone, one thought kept running through my mind. I did this to myself. I chose this man. I ignored the first warning signs. I believed his promises and excuses. And I kept silent. Always endlessly silent. The water running over my trembling fingers turned a faint pink. My split lip throbbed, and I gently dabbed it with a towel, trying not to touch the painful spot. My ears were still ringing from Artyom's shouting and the slap that sent me crashing into the coffee table. His bloodshot eyes, the bulging veins in his neck, and that smell, alcohol mixed with his favorite cologne, again. I didn't cry. I felt empty and oddly clear-minded. As if after months of wandering in fog, I'd finally reached the cliff's edge and realized there was no road forward. I had to turn around. But first, I had to figure out what to do now. The most logical thing, it seemed, was to lock myself in the bathroom until morning, wait for Artyom to pass out, then cancel dinner with my sister the next day. But it was already too late for that. The doorbell rang just as I was changing out of my blood-stained blouse. Through the frosted glass of the bathroom door, I saw the blurry outline of my husband heading to the hallway. I heard him open the door. I heard my sister's cheerful voice. I heard Artyom's routine reply, and then their footsteps moving into the living room. My first instinct was to stay hidden, pretend I was sick, but I knew my sister. Vera wouldn't rest until she saw me with her own eyes and made sure everything was fine. That meant I'd have to come out, explain, lie. Say I hit a shelf or fell in the bathroom. One of those stupid, implausible lies that don't even convince the one telling them. But there was no other way. I changed into a loose turtleneck sweater. There were no marks on my neck, but I wanted to hide, to shield myself. I tied my hair into a messy bun, tried smoothing the strands that stuck out, but my hands were shaking. There was no way to hide the bruise under my eye. Maybe with more time I could have tried some makeup, but Vera was already here. I had to go. Taking a deep breath, I opened the bathroom door and walked slowly toward the living room. Each step felt heavy, like walking barefoot over burning coals instead of the hardwood floor of our home. I saw them before they noticed me. Artyom lounged in his favorite chair, legs outstretched, a glass of amber liquid in hand. Vera was on the couch, animatedly talking, her golden hair spilling over her shoulders, her eyes sparkling with that light they always held when she was passionate about something. My younger sister, radiant, full of life, so unlike me in every way. She noticed me first. Her sentence cut off mid-word, eyes widening. She didn't gasp or rush toward me, she just froze. Her gaze darted from my face to Artyom and back. He noticed the change and turned to me. His face showed no shame, no guilt. On the contrary, a smug grin played on his lips. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of defiance and superiority. He wasn't afraid of what Vera would see, wasn't afraid of judgment. He knew there would be no consequences, just like every time before. I know it sounds strange, but Vera always adored Artyom from the very beginning. She was 16 when she met him, and like many teenage girls, she romanticized everything. Artyom, with his looks, confidence, and charm, captivated her. Not romantically, more like the older brother we never had, someone to admire, to look up to. Even when he began showing his true colors, Vera kept defending him. He's just tired. Work has been stressful. He's going through a rough patch. You don't understand the pressure he's under. I heard those excuses from her more times than I could count. Their relationship was strange, almost like accomplices. He was always kind and generous with her, helped with her studies, gave advice about jobs and relationships, and in return, she turned a blind eye to what he was like with me. Sometimes I felt she blamed me for not being good enough for him, that I didn't appreciate my luck, but I never told her how I felt. And now the three of us were frozen in this awful, silent tableau. Me with a bruised face, not knowing where to look. Artyom with his triumphant smirk. And Vera staring at me, unreadable. The silence lasted only seconds, but it felt eternal. Then, as if nothing had happened, Vera turned back to Artyom and resumed her story. As if she hadn't seen me, as if everything was normal. I didn't know what was worse, her silent complicity or his blatant contempt. A wave of loneliness washed over me so sharply it stole my breath. I had never felt so utterly alone, not even in the days when I truly was. To feel abandoned among your own loved ones, to be unprotected and betrayed by those you trust, there is nothing more devastating. I sat down at the edge of the couch, as far from Vera as possible. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air, or simply get up and leave. But I stayed motionless, hands clenched in my lap, staring at one spot. I couldn't hear their conversation, just a strange humming in my ears, like the sound of the ocean. Wave coming in, wave going out. I don't know how long passed before I noticed Artyom's voice getting louder, sharper. I blinked and came back to the room. He was on his second or third glass of whiskey. "Is your father coming too?" Artyom asked, his tone tinged with tension. I flinched. I had completely forgotten. This wasn't just a dinner with my sister. My father was supposed to come, for the first time in ages. He'd moved to another city and rarely visited. The last time I saw him was over a year ago, at Grandpa's funeral. And now he was coming, and I had a black eye, a split lip, and nothing prepared. "Yes, Dad's coming," Vera replied, glancing at the clock. "He's running a bit late. Said he'd stop by the hotel first to drop off his things." Artyom snorted and downed the rest of his drink. "Family reunion? How touching," he drawled, using that voice he always did right before picking a fight. Fear clenched in my chest. Not now, not in front of Dad. But it was too late for requests or prevention. Artyom was already in that state where only a miracle could stop him. The doorbell rang so suddenly I jumped. Was it really that late? Was Dad already here? Artyom stood, swaying slightly, and that same public smile slid onto his face. Charming, confident. The smile I had once fallen in love with. The smile that now made me sick. "I'll get it," he said, heading for the door. I froze. Should I get up? Stay seated? Run to the bedroom? But it was too late. I heard my father's voice, deep and calm, so familiar. I heard Artyom's false greetings. And I realized that what I had feared for years was about to happen. My father would see what my life had become. See what I had become. Mikhail Andreevich Klimov had always been the embodiment of strength and justice for me. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a direct gaze and firm voice. A man who never raised his voice but was always obeyed. A man who taught Vera and me to stand up for ourselves, to never let anyone hurt us. I remember sitting on his lap as a child while he told me, "Alina, you're stronger than you think. Never let anyone convince you otherwise, and never tolerate what should never be tolerated." And here I was, sitting in my own home, face battered, trembling with fear of my own husband. What would Dad think? That I had betrayed everything he taught me, that I was so weak I deserved this. I heard their footsteps. I lifted my eyes. Dad entered the room, and his gaze immediately found mine. I watched his expression change. His features hardened, his eyes narrowed. He froze mid-step, then slowly turned to look at Artyom, still standing behind him, still smirking. It took my father 30 seconds to assess the situation. 30 seconds of silence, so thick it felt solid. And then, something completely unexpected happened. My father smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind someone gives when they've made a decision, when they're ready to act. "Artyom, right?" he asked, extending his hand. "I've been meaning to get to know you better. Heard a lot about you." Artyom clearly hadn't expected this. He hesitated, then shook the offered hand. "Likewise, Mikhail Andreevich," he replied. "Alina's told me so much," my father said, still holding his hand. "I'm sure you have," he added, still smiling. "I think you and I need to have a serious talk, man to man." I didn't understand. Why wasn't Dad yelling, demanding answers? Why was he smiling and speaking so calmly? What did he mean by this talk? But before I could say a word, Dad turned to me. "Alina," he said, his voice gentler now, "go pack the essentials. You're coming with me." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a decision, final and unarguable. And I knew. There was no point arguing. I didn't want to argue. Artyom opened his mouth, but Dad raised a hand to silence him. "We'll talk," he said. "Have a seat. This will take a while." I stood and made my way to the bedroom on shaky legs. As I passed Vera, I couldn't help but glance at her. She still sat in the same position, but her expression had changed. It was now a strange mixture of fear, confusion, and relief. I wasn't sure. We had never really understood each other. In the bedroom, I grabbed a small travel bag and started stuffing in clothes. Underwear, jeans, t-shirts, sweater, toothbrush, comb. My hands trembled. I dropped things repeatedly, but kept going. The living room was silent, and that scared me more than shouting. When I finished packing, I paused in front of the wardrobe mirror. A tired woman stared back at me, bruised, hollow-eyed. I didn't recognize myself. Where was the Alina who dreamed of becoming an architect? The honors graduate who used to laugh so infectiously? That woman was gone. Day by day, year by year, Artyom had erased her, turned her into a shadow, a puppet, and I had let him, out of fear, out of a false sense of duty, out of hope that things might change. But now, looking at that reflection, I realized I didn't want to be this woman anymore. I didn't want to be afraid. I didn't want to hide. I didn't want to be silent. Without thinking, I grabbed my bag and stepped into the hallway. My heart was pounding, as if trying to break free, like it could no longer bear the cage of fear and submission. The corridor was still wrapped in that unsettling silence. I walked closer and froze at the entrance to the living room. My father was sitting in the armchair where Artyom had been moments before. Now Artyom stood, leaning on the back of a chair, as if weighing his options. Flee or stay. His gaze darted like that of a predator suddenly realizing he was no longer at the top of the food chain. My father, on the other hand, was calm. There was no shouting, no threats, just cold focus and a quiet strength that couldn't be ignored. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel the atmosphere tighten, like a string pulled taut before it snaps. My father spoke. Artyom listened, or pretended to. Sometimes he tried to cut in, but it always ended the same, with a short, piercing look that could shut anyone down. And then, he did it. My father stood up, walked over to Artyom, and stepped close. No blow, no shouting, just a slow, deliberate motion. He placed a hand on my husband's shoulder, like leaving a mark. And in that moment, I knew Artyom was afraid. Not for himself, no. He was afraid of losing control. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. True uncertainty. I took a step forward and entered the room. They both turned to look at me. Artyom opened his mouth to say something, but my father spoke first. He simply pointed to the door. And I walked. As I passed, I felt panic rising in my former husband. He lunged to follow, but my father stepped between us. He didn't touch him, just stood there. And that was enough. On the landing, Vera was waiting. She clutched my bag to her chest. Her face held everything: fear, guilt, despair. She tried to speak, but I just took the bag from her hands and walked past. I didn't say a word. Words weren't needed. It was already done. My father and I descended the stairs without looking back. The stairwell was quiet, except for the hum of the old elevator and that familiar smell, damp and dusty. At the exit, my father paused, held the door open, and motioned for me to go first. Outside, it smelled like June rain, though none had fallen. Just a warm evening, heavy and still, like after a storm. We walked to the car. He silently opened the passenger door and I got in. When he started the engine, I felt the air finally leave my lungs. Not tears, not a breakdown, just silence inside me. But for the first time in a long while, it wasn't empty. He took me to the hotel where he was staying. Not home, not to my mother's. He knew I needed neutral ground. The room was simple but clean, with a view of the lit street and a soft bed. I sat on the edge, hugging myself. He placed the bag near the door, gave a slight nod, and left. I was alone. And then it began. At first, just a tremble in my fingers. Then it spread through my body like a current of heat. My heart started pounding again, and for the first time all evening, I cried. A real cleansing cry. No screaming, no words, just tears, like rain after a long drought. I let it all out. The fear, the pain, the shame, the despair. I didn't stop myself. Not a single part of me tried to resist. I cried for everything. For the lost years, for the broken self, for the silence, for the fear, and for surviving. When it was over, I looked at my hands. There was no blood. They weren't shaking. These were my hands, mine. Not his, not hands that flinched or shielded, just hands of a woman who survived. I lay down on the bed and fell asleep without changing clothes, without turning off the light. The sleep was deep, dreamless, as if my body finally understood. It no longer needed to brace for the next blow. And morning came. From that moment on, I decided I would no longer live in fear. I zipped up my bag and stepped out of the bedroom. My steps were hesitant, but something inside me had already begun to shift. Deep within my soul, the real Alina was waking up, the strong, confident one, the one my father loved, the one he believed in. When I entered the living room, Artyom was sitting in the armchair, no longer smug. His eyes were fixed on my father, his posture tense, stripped of the ease he used to wear like armor. My father stood before him, arms crossed. He didn't even turn to me, but said firmly, "Ready?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady, no trembling. Artyom jumped up. "Wait, you seriously think you can just walk away? After everything?" My father took a step forward, his tone calm but razor sharp. "And you seriously thought you could lay a hand on my daughter and get away with it?" Artyom froze. His face went pale, and he looked away. "This is none of your business," he muttered, but the old confidence was gone. "It becomes my business when I see what you've done to her, when I see the way you look at her." Father stepped closer, leaned in, and said in a low voice, "If you ever come within 5 steps of her again, you'll be dealing with me. Understood?" Artyom didn't answer. He just sank back into the chair like the air had been knocked out of him. We moved toward the door. Vera stood up silently, her face white as a sheet, but she said nothing. Only as I passed did she whisper, "I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I simply looked at her and walked on. Not out of anger. There were just no words left. Everything had already been said in silence. Everything had been understood through a glance. Outside, the air was cool. My father opened the car door for me, and I got in, clutching my bag to my chest. He walked around the hood and got in behind the wheel. "I should have come sooner," he said quietly, eyes on the road. "No, Dad." I shook my head. "Now is the perfect time." He nodded, started the engine, and we drove off. I didn't know what came next, how I would live, where, with whom. I didn't know if I'd find the strength to heal, to forgive myself, to trust again. But one thing I knew for sure, there was no going back. I had taken the first step, and I wouldn't stop now. 3 weeks have passed. I wake up not to shouting, not to fear, but to sunlight. A soft patch of it resting on my pillow. My room now smells like freshness and freedom. No trace of foreign perfume, no tension hanging in the air. Just me, and the window, where life bursts in every morning. My father gave me the keys to our old summer house, the one we once painted together over a long, golden summer. A lot has changed since then, but the walls still remember laughter. And in the shed, old cans of paint still gather dust. I mop the floors, repaint the walls, throw out useless junk. In a way, I'm doing to this house what I'm doing to myself, cleansing, restoring, rebuilding. Every morning I write, not because I want to become a writer, but because words are the only way I know to carry the weight inside me. I write down what I feel. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's emptiness, sometimes it's gratitude, toward myself for not breaking, sometimes toward my father, who against all odds was there for me. Sometimes I think of Artyom, not with hate, but like you remember a dream you were drowning in, until you woke up, gasping in the dark. That's not my reality anymore. It has no power over me. I am free. Vera wrote to me. At first, just a single message. "Forgive me. I knew everything. I was afraid. I kept silent. I had no right." I stared at those words for a long time. Didn't reply at first, and then I typed, "You could have saved me sooner, but now you can save someone else. Do it." That was the end of it, and it was enough. Today, I look out the window again. I see the neighbor's little girl walking down the path with her backpack, her mother waving from the porch. And suddenly I want something simple, to bake a pie, to buy flowers, to plant something in the earth. Because life is coming back, slowly, gently, but it is coming back. And now I know for sure, this is only the beginning. A year has passed. Spring is on the calendar, the same season when everything fell apart. Only now it doesn't frighten me. On the contrary, in each of its days there's a rhythm, one I've learned to live by, to breathe, to not be afraid of silence. I live at the dacha almost all the time now. The city feels foreign, too loud, too fast. Here, I feel the earth beneath my feet, hear woodpeckers tapping in the forest each morning, and I know every cat on the street by name. I have a garden now. Not a big one, but in it grow strawberries, mint, black currants, all the things I once picked with my mother as a child. And that brings pieces of me back. I don't just write anymore. I finished a course in art therapy, and now I lead a group for women who've survived abusive relationships. We meet once a week, around a table, with tea, with drawings, with journals. Sometimes someone just sits in silence, and that's okay. The important thing is that we're no longer silent inside. One day, a very young girl came to me. Big eyes, shoulders drawn in as if she was always bracing for a blow. I saw myself in her, and I just hugged her, said nothing, only, "You're not alone anymore." That was the beginning of her journey, and it became part of mine. My father and I finally talked, really talked. That night, when a storm raged over the roof and the power went out, we sat in the kitchen with tea and a flashlight, and he suddenly said, "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." I looked at his hands, rough, tired, and answered, "You're here now, that's enough." I don't think about Artyom anymore. He's vanished from my world, literally moved to another city. Someone told me he lost his job, that he was accused of something. I didn't feel joy. I just shrugged. I no longer live inside his name. I adopted a dog. His name is Goose. Silly, kind, rescued from a shelter. He's now my alarm clock, my walking companion, my most honest friend. And recently, I heard music again. Real music. An old melody drifted from a neighbor's open window. And suddenly I realized I didn't flinch. I smiled, and I sang along, softly. A small victory. I didn't become forever strong. This isn't a movie. I still have days when it all hurts. I know who I am. I know I have the right to exist, to love, to create, to dream. And this is the end of my story, or rather, my beginning.